Welcome everybody to our IFMA San Diego meeting for March. We have a lot to do today, so we're going to go pretty quick. Fasten your seatbelts. First thing we're going to talk about is our announcements. We have something really cool coming up. It is a IFMA Leverage Your Beverage virtual cider tasting. For those who know what that is, for me, that means apple juice. For the rest of you, it's cider. Anyway, the tasting is on March 25th at 4 o'clock. You need to sign up because here's the deal. The first 20 FMs, facility management people, to sign up are free. After that, the cost is $25 for associate and for FM members. Non-members, it's $50. But you get 4 cider bottles, 4 full-size cider bottles from what I understand. So it's pretty well worth the cost. So that's on the 25th. Sign up. Registration is open.
Where?
Next we have our luncheon on the 14th of April, the next luncheon. The title is Today's Security Technology, New Evolutions in the Corporate Workplace. So that is in April. Any other announcements for what we have going on, you can find on our Facebook page for IFMA San Diego, or on our Instagram page, IFMA San Diego, or on the LinkedIn. We will announce it there as well. We also have a newsletter that goes out with all this information and more. There are great articles and classes offered by SDG&E. You'll find many things that you've been wondering about. We have IFMA Engage. We have lots of information for you. So check out our newsletter as well. So right now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank you. Oh, one more thing I forgot. Every Tuesday between 4 and 5 p.m., we have an Instagram live interview. Last week, we interviewed David Suter of CBSI. This week, we interviewed Ann Benj of Cultura, the CEO. And next week, we have someone else just as interesting, Irene Thomas Johnson. She's the president of San Fernando Valley IFMA. And they're going to talk about the Global Task Force Initiative. It's going to be very interesting. So please join us then. And now I'd like to introduce Ed Pelletier, a word from our sponsor. Ed?
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me. We're excited to be the sponsor for today's event. And we're Avertech. We do electronics recycling, data destruction, and asset recovery. Been a long time IFMA member, and we're happy again to be a sponsor. So got a little video for you guys to see here as far as how we're handling everything with COVID right now. And yeah, enjoy, and looking forward to today's presentation.
At Avertech, we realize that your data and security are critical to you, which is why we've been helping to protect it for over 15 years. But there is something far more critical, and that is the health and safety of our clients. During this current COVID-19 crisis, we're still open and operational while protecting your health and safety. We have created a contact-free environment where you can safely drop off your electronics for recycling and data destruction, thus minimizing any social interaction. Your partners at Avertech want to be there to support your data and equipment disposal needs now during these extraordinary circumstances, as well as when we return to business as usual. Thank you for your attention, and know that we will get through this together. To learn more, call us at 858-715-0950 or visit us at www.avertech.com.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Avertech. We really appreciate you guys. And as I had told you earlier, since I've been doing business with you for years, I really mean that. I really appreciate you. You've done a lot for me and my company in the past. Next, we have new members, and we're going to turn it over to Lydia, our membership chair. Lydia?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to our San Diego chapter, Jaylyn Gerber. She's with Landcare Logic, and she's a brand new member. We want to welcome her, and that's our only new member, so welcome.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Lydia. And now, Denise, I'd like for you to come on board and tell everyone about our guest speaker today for DEI, which is a lot of words for me to say. So you go ahead and tell them all about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Today I have Loren Cobbs with us. Loren is a passionate diversity, equity, and inclusion champion who believes in equitable ecosystems and organization. Loren is the owner of Crate Agency, a consulting firm dedicated to building stronger brands and more inclusive companies. Loren holds a master's in public administration from Columbia University and a bachelor's in economics from Purdue. She previously served as a U.S. diplomat in Mexico and Thailand. Thailand, and speaks English, Spanish, and Arabic. Loren loves Law and Order, SVU, and spending time with her 6 nephews. She hails from Cincinnati, Ohio, and currently splits her time between San Diego and Chicago. For the housekeeping, please questions in the chat box as they come up, and we will have a Q&A session at the end. Loren, the mic is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm so excited to be here. And also, if there are any other fellow Law and Order SVU lovers or criminal minds, yeah, definitely would love to chat about that later too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by sharing my screen to talk about what we're discussing today. Oh, and I love it. Another Loren who loves SVU. Okay, let me make sure. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Perfect. So for today, we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you've likely heard these words all around in the last year. And you've probably likely seen the acronym DEI, DNI, IDEA. The way it shows up is many different ways, but the crux of the conversation is about how do we infuse diversity, equity within our organizations, and then how do we make sure that they are inclusive. And so I won't spend a lot of time on this next slide, but essentially, I am Loren, I am an equity advocate, and I strongly believe that strong teams are really comprised of diverse members within our organizations that have diverse perspectives and different backgrounds. And so the first question I typically get is, well, what is DNI? Well, let's talk about it. So if we look at the textbook definition, DNI it literally is this idea, or it's a phrase that's used to describe programs and policies that are intentional. They intentionally promote representation and participation of diverse groups of people. And what those diverse groups of people, what falls into that bucket? I mean, there are a lot of ways in which people can show up and identify as diverse. So there's diversity within gender. There's diversity in race and ethnicity. There's diversity within abilities and disabilities. Diversity in religions and what we hold sacred, in cultures, in our ages, and our sexual orientations, as well as people with just diverse backgrounds. So you come from a rural community or upbringing or an urban one, diversity in experiences and a skill level and expertise. So there are many ways that we all show up and add diversity to the teams that we're on. And so when you think about D&I, you likely are saying, well, when I hear diversity, equity, inclusion, it's usually around the idea or the identity of race and or gender. And so why is that? Well, I would say there are a few reasons, but the biggest one is typically that our race and gender are typically viewed as easily identifiable external characteristics. It's pretty hard. It would be pretty hard for me to hide the fact that I'm a Black woman. And so these are visual cues that we give whether we want to or not. And while there are some ways in which the other parts of our identity, such as citizenship, can be hidden to the general public, that race and gender piece really can't be, and not that it should be, right? And so, but because it's so easily identifiable externally, those are the two that tend to be abused repeatedly and extensively. And if you look at our history, race and gender also tends to be the ways in which society can at times group us or place stereotypes. And so let's really talk about, what does it really mean? What does it mean? What does diversity mean? What does equity mean? And what does inclusion mean? Because oftentimes they're bunched up as like DNI, but they mean different things and the implications are a bit different. So as we move forward, we'll look at a breakdown of diversity, equity, inclusion. So with diversity, you see diversity is typically expressed in a myriad of forms. And so those, again, we talked a lot in the prior slide, is about how do you show up, or how do you identify from a race, ethnicity perspective, your gender identity. It's a lot about identities, your sexual orientation identity, also your socioeconomic status, language, culture, national origin, again, citizenship, political perspective. Excuse me. So it's a bit about how you identify and show up in the world. Whereas equity is a little different. And I included this graphic of equity and equality because at times these definitions are fused together as if they're one, but they're not. So equality tends to look at, how do we give all people the same resources to meet whatever goal? However, within equality, it sometimes can ignore the fact that if we give everyone the same resources today, it may ignore historical challenges or inequalities that they faced previously. So equity really looks at this idea of giving people what they need, not just giving everyone the exact same thing, but giving everyone what they need, especially in consideration of a historical context. So has there been historical inequity within this group of people, or within people who identify as a certain, in a certain way? And it's a commitment to working to challenge and respond to the historical and often present day biases or harassments and discriminations that come up when someone is facing any inequity. And it requires a commitment to not just the idea of something, but to actual policies that offer equitable opportunities for all people, and that removes discrimination based on any of the ways in which we identify. And then finally, as we look at inclusion, we're looking at, well, how do people feel when they're with us and around us? Is there a sense of belonging? Do people feel welcomed when they enter into our spaces, our teams, our organizations? Do people with different perspectives, are they respected and heard? And does everyone feel like they have a sense of belonging and an inclusion when they are together? And so from the inclusion perspective, it's so important that we build up a critical mass of diverse groups of people within our organizations. But it's also important that we build up a vibrant climate and culture of inclusiveness, so that people who have different perspectives, who show up differently, who identify differently, so that they feel like they are also welcome and included. It's not just allowing them into the room, it's joyfully welcoming them at the table as well. And so you may say, okay, I understand DE&I, like what the basis of it is, but like, why were we inundated, or have we been inundated with these conversations recently? Well, there's a really, really easy answer. Around last year, around May, when we're all in what I like to call the fun parts of the lockdown, where we were still baking and learning how to make a million different recipes of banana bread, something very tragic happened. But it wasn't anything new. It wasn't a completely new occurrence or an episode that happened, but the circumstances around when and how it happened really forced our nation to reckon with race. And so on May 25th in Minneapolis, George Perry Floyd Jr., often known as George Floyd, was killed during an arrest after a store clerk alleged he had passed a counterfeit $20 bill in his store. George, an African-American man, was accused of presenting a counterfeit $20 bill. What then happened after that, as I'm sure many of us know, is that one out of 4 police officers showed up to the scene, and one of those individuals knelt on Mr. Floyd's neck for a period of 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And we all watched this happen because of the wide use of cell phone and cell phone videos. So we collectively, many of us watched Mr. Floyd essentially die on camera after Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And during that period, Mr. Floyd repeated almost infamously, "Please, I can't breathe," nearly 30 times. And what you see aftermath of what came next, the media was inundated with conversations about police brutality and race relations and inequity that has been historically in the American society. But it wasn't just media talking about it. One of the reasons that media talked about it so much was there were widespread global protests around Mr. Floyd's death, but also the historical timeline that basically showed a large number of Mr. Floyds by different names, a large number of individuals who identify as Black and Brown, African Americans or Latinx, who died during police encounters who were unarmed. And this, again, as I know, it was a tipping point because we all were at home. We didn't have work, having to go back and forth from work, distracting us for many of us. We weren't out socializing in the way we would have been pre-pandemic. We were out home and we watched this. And I note that because just a few months earlier, Ahmaud Arbery had been murdered by a group of individuals while he was running. And then later, Breonna Taylor also died in a similar tragic way. But the unique circumstances and the whirlwind that was created around Mr. Floyd's death was almost a perfect storm that we couldn't ignore. And it highlighted a real long history of inequities. And when we talk about inequities, you may say, okay, well, I understand historically bad things have happened. But what I'm here to talk about is a bit more of the present day where we're still at. And so if you look at education, for example, you see that inequity is persistent throughout our education system, the way that our schools are funded. Also, if you look at discipline, we see that Black students are on average 3 times more likely to be punished than a white student for committing the exact same offense. If you look at it from a health perspective, you see that Black women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in childbirth or throughout the childbirthing process or pregnancy process than white women, and that the infant mortality rate for Black infants is 2 times that of white infants. And this isn't just by chance. We have to look at the fact that within our systems and oftentimes within our societies and the organizations and ways in which we navigate through society, that is, those ideas about inequity and who deserves and who doesn't are oftentimes silently reinforced. There was a recent study conducted by the University of Virginia and a few medical training associations that show an overwhelming number of medical students and physicians believe that Black people's nerve endings were less sensitive than white people, or they believe that Black people's skin was thicker than white people. And so what does that lead to? Well, it leads to a system of undertreatment, or a system in which our healthcare experts don't believe the patients who look like me because of the color of the skin. And then if you look at it from an economic perspective, we know that job applicants who are named Connor and Sarah have a higher chance of landing an interview than someone who's named Deshaun or Tanika. We also see that Black workers overall are 2 times more likely to be unemployed or underemployed than white workers overall. And this doesn't matter whether we're talking about the pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, or not post, or in this pandemic environment. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about education levels. This is across all levels, whether you have a high school degree, college degree. And from a wealth perspective, we see that white high school graduates have more wealth than Black college grads. And so as we look at, well, what happened after the reckoning in May of last year, and then what does this mean for everyone that's here? What does this mean about how we view DNI, but then how do we make commitments to it? Or how do we see the value in making a commitment to it? So we'll look at what happened in the aftermath. So we see that companies big and small across the spectrum, no matter what you were producing, what services you offered, whether you were in production, manufacturing, you see that companies express solidarity. They donated to racial justice organizations, and most importantly, they vowed to change their office cultures to one that are more diverse and inclusive. And for example, Adidas vowed to fill 30% of its open positions with Black and brown hires. Amazon and IBM vowed to stop using or halt the use of facial recognition software that had been criticized widely for unfair treatment and implications for Black people. PayPal vowed to create a $500 million fund to support Black and Latinx businesses. And then the Quaker Oats Company, interestingly, vowed to change the name of their infamous breakfast brand, Aunt Jemima, and to remove everything that was on the shelves and to rename it. And you see here that the renaming was the Pearl Milling Company. And so there were a lot of commitments made. And as we come up later this spring on that 1-year anniversary, I want you to just look at who has updates, who can talk about what they did. And also, if your company made commitments, look at or be aware of or ask, where are you? Or where's your firm and your company in tracking against those commitments made? So as we look at why does it matter? Like, why are we sitting here nearly a year later after George Floyd's death talking about DNI? Well, there are 3 big reasons. Your clients, your people, and your teams, you, everyone that's sitting here today, and your profits as an organization. So we see that from a client and customer perspective, there is a clear appetite, but not just an appetite, a growing demand that companies show up in the racial and social justice space, and that they just don't show up with niceties and commitments, verbal commitments, but they show up meaningfully. So a recent Barron study shows that nearly 60% of all Americans want the companies that they buy products and do business and receive services from to have a position about issues around racial discrimination and social justice. And one interesting thing here is that people are walking away from big deals when they don't. There's a story about Beyonce, who I love, in Ivy Park, and they were looking to secure a large brand partnership with another sports company. And they originally went to Nike. However, when they showed up to the deal, they saw that no one on Nike's executive team looked like the people that they represented. And so they walked away and moved it to Adidas, which if you are a Beyonce stan or part of the Beehive, you will have seen these massive clothing drops between Ivy Park and Adidas that sell out in mere minutes. And so it's important to note that while diversity and inclusion has been touted and used in mission statements, that's no longer enough. That's just not enough anymore. And it's important that companies make and act on these commitments, but that they build diverse teams of people doing the work. And that gets to the people part, your teams, who you work with every day, who you lead, who you report to. We see that oftentimes there can be diversity in the lower ranks of an organization. But sometimes you don't see that reflected in the leadership of the organization, the people who are making the decisions there. And so it's important that whether you're in manufacturing, logistics, on the supply side, specifically a facility manager, anywhere you are within that spectrum, D&I should be seen as central to your business strategy. It shouldn't be siloed as a HR or side project. It should represent a core business goal. And that's from hiring vendors to workplace experiences, because when it's implemented effectively, it really becomes a competitive strategy. And so FedEx is a real leader in this space. And their chief diversity officer said something very salient recently. She said, when you utilize all the intelligence in the room, you can only come up with a better product or better service. So there's not a lot of risk in investing in it. And actually it's the opposite. You see that organizations that have invested in D&I, it made it a core tenet of their business strategy. They perform better than their peers. And the video we'll look at, we'll talk a little bit about that. And that's because as people who sit on teams and in sections, we're individuals. And we don't just exist in a vacuum. We don't just show up to work forgetting everything else that happened or our experiences and our identities outside of that. And so it's important that we are always aware of a wider social context in which we all live and in which our workforce and our workplace is embedded. It's important that everyone's aware of needs or potential needs, or at least invested in understanding what the needs of each individual team members are, so that we can continue to foster a sense of belonging within our workplaces. And it's important to do that because when you do that, when you respect different perspectives and experiences of the people who work under you, the people who work besides you, above you, and partner with you, you create really strong teams and you get the most out of people. And then finally, we'll look at profits. Again, the Manufacturing and Industrial Council estimated that it costs nearly $3,500 for each hire that you bring on. And that excludes The cost of bringing people into the position, once they're there, getting them onboarded, the cost it takes to find, to onboard someone or do the extra work. So hiring new people is a cost. If you bring in good people and they feel supported and they feel like they belong, you reduce your costs by having to constantly bring in new people to replace them, someone that's left. And then people add the most value when they can show up as themselves and they feel welcomed. And from an output perspective, you see that a diversity in your teams typically result in a diversity of viewpoints, which nixes out the groupthink and yes men, and it requires people to communicate more clearly to get their business idea across, but it also creates more creative solutions, it solves problems faster, and it enhances your capability to serve the interests of all your clients and customers. And a recent McKinsey study showed that between 33 to 35% of companies that were found to be the most diverse, measured by race and ethnicity particularly, they have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. And so there's a real benefit to this. So as we move on to this video, I'll just say that centralizing D&I is really essential. And I will stop sharing for a moment so that we can watch the video. Okay, perfect. So thank you for that. And so for clarification, I'm not suggesting that today you go and like hire or fire members of your staff or turn around. What I am encouraging you to do is centralize DE&I at the core of your business. And it will take work and buy-in from every level of the organization, which goes back to the point around, creating incentives that really stick and incentives that really encourage and require your company, your organization as a whole to make real strides and to really move the needle. And it will also require you to reconcile the fact that you are human, I am human, we're all human, and mistakes and mishaps will come up at some point. There may be misunderstandings, you may feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. I believe in a lifetime of learning and growing. And so for me, there's never a time which I feel like I know it all or I'm all well prepared about anything or everything. I'm constantly learning. And so that helps me in understanding that if I make a mistake, that's okay. I'm just going to assume good intentions for others. And I hope that they do the same for me. And so as we go into our breakout sessions, I want to just quickly cover what we're going to be talking about in the breakout, because I think we can talk a lot about the impact that inequality in areas that aren't inclusive, how they have and show up in society. But I think it's important to really focus on the ways in which we can make small changes and changes that we have control over to move the needle at home, but also at work. And so I'll just quickly share my screen again, and then we can go into breakout sessions. So for this breakout session, we're going to look at your sphere of influence. And in the sphere of influence, we affirm that within your organization, you have 3 areas of control. You have control of your role, how you show up as an individual team member. You have impact and influence on your team. And then you have also another layer of influence on your company. So in this breakout, we're going to talk about the ways in which DE&I can show up, has shown up, or maybe you even have personal examples of how it's shown up in your role, in your team, or within your company. just to kind of get these ideas and the conversations flowing. And so as an example, I'll do one for myself. So for me, I am going to, with the things that are in my realm of control and in my realm of influence, is I can read and learn more and educate myself about and understanding the roots of Asian American discrimination and model minority stereotypes. I can also read to learn more about the rise in anti-Asian sentiments and violence. Within my team, I can respectfully share credited learning resources and books and things that I've learned in a very respectful and open manner. And if I hear a joke that's offensive, I won't just not laugh at it, but I'll also speak up and share why it's offensive or it could be hurtful. And then from a company perspective, I am going to talk to my company leadership about what our plans are around encouraging an inclusive and welcoming office culture. All right, so if there aren't any questions immediately, I am going to have us open up the breakout rooms. And I will be leading one, as well as my colleague, Kristen Andrews-Reeves, who will also be leading another one.
Yeah, if there isn't any questions, then I'll go ahead and send everyone out. Okay, everyone's back, I think.
Hi, Sherry. Hi, Will.
Hey,
Hi. So if everyone's back, we want to say thank you so much to Loren Cobbs for the message that she's brought us, the conversations. Can I see everyone? I can only see Barry. Is everyone back now?
yes.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
That's okay. if you
So
want
we
to.
want to thank Lauren so much for everything, the conversations, the openness, all the message that she's brought to us. We also want to thank Avritech for sponsoring today's event. And to let you know, I just got news, guys. We have 14 spots open in the free category for the cider tasting. You have an opportunity in the chat. We put the link. The next 14 people get to do the cider tasting for free. So on your mark,
FMs.
FMs only. So on your mark, get set, go to the chat. Otherwise, folks, we do have another breakout room. You can continue the conversation that you had in that breakout room, network a bit, have a good time. So thank you very much, and we will see you next month.